You're listening to Till the Bottom. For better or for worse, everything is fascinating if you dig deep enough. If you agree with this, then this podcast might be right for you. Let's start talking. Hello everyone, here's another episode of Till the Bottom. And as always, this is your hosts Nacho and Mitra. And today we have a very special guest, Sara, with us. Mm-hmm. Sara is originally from Jordan and currently pursuing her PhD in the Technical University of Dresden, in the Department of Architecture.
No, Sociology.
In the Department of Sociology. Mm-hmm. Okay. And today's conversation, I guess, before we introduce Sara, is one of the many conversations where we'll take a deep dive into the whole immigration issue, or how refugees are seen and perceived, and the kind of issues that arise out of migration in general.
And how refugee settlements evolve over time.
So specifically today we focus on how refugee settlements evolve over time. Sara herself is doing a case study in her home country, in one of the refugee camps from which arose out of the Syrian crisis that started, where millions and millions of refugees which moved into Jordan, basically.
In Jordan, yes.
And before I start messing up the numbers again, maybe I just give it over to you. So basically just start by talking a bit about what you were looking into in your PhD.
Yeah, I just want to say something before, is because I just want to kind of mark the difference between this episode and the ones we have had before. Because in the previous episodes, the topics that we have talked about have been more or less general, and we have a guest with us, and that guest might be more or less familiar with the topic that we're talking about. But in this one, we're going to be, at least for the first fraction of the conversation, we're going to be focusing on what you do for your research. So as you introduce yourself and your background a little bit, if you want to, and you introduce the topic, you will basically be diving into the topic for this conversation. And you just can hit it off from there. So please.
Yeah. So I take it from here. Yeah, my name is Sara, and I am originally an architect. However, now I'm in sociology, or a sociologist, and I'm investigating a refugee camp in Jordan that is really attracted so much media attention. It's called Zaatari. It's the first Syrian refugee camp to open in Jordan. It's
when did it open?
July 2012. So immediately as a response to Syrian crisis, which started.
When did the war start?
I mean, Arab Spring started end of 2011, but until it escalated to create a refugee problem, it was by that time. So it was.
It's very early.
Yeah, very early on with the crisis, and that's the thing with Zaatari.
So at that point of time, the rest of the world wasn't aware of the situation. Or how it's developing?
I mean, definitely it was aware of the conflict, but it had not become a global problem with the refugees. It was still regional, let's say. The thing about Zaatari that makes it super interesting, in my opinion, or for an architect, is that it exponentially grew to kind of mimic cities or exhibit these city-like features. And this is why it attracted so much media attention, because of its growth and its spontaneous growth, its scale and resemblance to cities. And I always like to mention these numbers, which are the factual numbers, is that it currently hosts 80,000 citizens. At a certain moment, it had 200,000 citizens, which made it the second largest city in Jordan after the capital.
Okay.
So when you say citizens, you don't mean that they
refugees,
right? Like they don't have a status of citizen.
No, of course not. Yeah,
and that probably is part of issues.
Yeah, a citizen of Zaatari. So let's say a refugee.
That's true. Because it's an urban space, that's why you call it a city.
Yeah, but I guess
this we can discuss why we call it an urban space. But to continue on the numbers, 400,000 people passed through Zaatari, meaning they came shortly and migrated somewhere else. So in terms of scale, it's significant in the scale of Jordan.
somewhere else within Jordan, or they also just left the country?
It depends, because there are two ways to leave Zaatari. You can either try to migrate somewhere else, or you can find a sponsor, at least for a certain time. I think now sponsorship is not working. It's not in use as much, but you need a Jordanian sponsor, meaning a local citizen who says, I guarantee him, so get him out and he's my guest or something.
Can I have a naive question? So the conflict has had no repercussions as such on Jordan? Like, other than the refugees? Like, is there conflict also happening? Like, ISIS
you mean like
threat?
war flowing into it?
I think the Arab Spring did echo in Jordan. We had some few... The thing is that it echoed everywhere. And I think by the time it reached Jordan, we stopped romanticizing the Arab Spring. So when it had reached Tunisia and Egypt, it was the ideal scenario that in 28 days it brought down regimes and it brought us all these hopes. When it reached Libya and Syria, it had started to reach Jordan, and people started being so scared because we started seeing the other scenario of the Arab Spring, which is not bringing down regimes and seeing very close democracy, but rather conflict and civil war.
When you say that it started reaching Jordan, you mean... Was there a particular section of the population that was more sympathetic to the sentiments of the Arab Spring?
I think this still
were
exists.
they the younger people? Or
I think this is a hard question to answer. I remember there were some protests in some roundabout in Jordan for a couple of weeks, and luckily there was no bloodshed, and different parties were involved. And I remember mostly young people, and I just remember that the most significant party in Jordan is the Muslim Brotherhood Party, participated what they called it a second line participation, if I'm not mistaken, which means they're not officially representing the Muslim Brotherhood, but they were like present.
Yeah, but it's everyone knows.
Yeah, but it was really minor protests that did not do anything.
Didn't gather any momentum.
I remember we kind of
and you were in Jordan at that point of time.
Yeah, I was. But I did not participate. It was. It did not.
But what was the liberal voice there? They were completely opposed to.
The thing is that it's yes, of course, there are these definitions within the Jordanian scene of the liberals and people in the left. In the beginning, the whole sentiment was, as I said, super encouraged. But I can't give you super defined positions, and it's really different when you don't have the classic tradition of democracy, that these things are not so pronounced. And
sure.
Yeah, I probably just need to clarify a little bit that Jordan is ruled by a monarchy. Right, it's not.
We say it's a constitutional monarchy for the record, but it's not.
So there are elections, but the elections are
we have elections
to choose,
for the parliament. Parts of that. We have.
So you have a king.
Yeah.
Who takes over some part of the regular day-to-day stuff, or is it like the Queen in England? Not
okay. Officially speaking, our constitution resembles the constitution of England. However, there was a time, or in UK, when the Queen or the King at that time stepped away and said, "Now I give power to the people." But our King still holds the power, meaning he can still resolve the parliament, which happens quite often in Jordan.
So
okay,
this is kind of similar to Thailand, actually, where the king has a lot of power and influence there, but they also have a parliament in there.
At the moment, the discussion in Jordan is to actually move towards a constitutional monarchy. Of course, I don't know much about it to discuss, but the claim is that our crown prince will lead a constitutional monarchy. So, Okay. We only have future to tell.
So how does the border look like when the refugee exodus happened? Like was any pre-screening?
The thing is that I don't know how if there was any vetting process. You say I think no. In the beginning, the thing about being a Syrian at that time, you needed nothing to enter Jordan. We had some sort of agreements. You only needed your ID, and you can have lunch in Jordan, and that's it. Not even immediately we started having screening processes, and I don't know how it's functioning now, but it's really definitely difficult for, at least when I meet refugees here in Germany who have family in Jordan and they still did not get the German passport, they really cannot get into Jordan that easily.
As a route to Germany or some other place.
No, the entering Jordan now as a Syrian is not as easy as it used to be. This was my point.
Yeah, sure.
I want to try to put some perspective on the numbers, and you correct me if I'm wrong. As far as I am aware, the number of refugees that have entered Jordan overall since the crisis started is around 600,000 or something like that. Is that a good estimate? I seem to have read that. That's more or less.
I think so, but I don't know why I've also read 1,600,000. You're right.
I read that in Lebanon. It's something like a million something. Over a million.
I think, over a million.
Over a million.
Right. So Jordan is the third refugee hosting country. I don't know why we got that title as the third. I guess it was earlier estimates, because now Germany officially took 1 million. So maybe...
I'm just trying to say this because probably I think the general imagination of the audience is that countries like Germany and Sweden, that definitely have taken a very big load of refugees, are probably the countries that have taken the most, but it's not the case, right? Some countries like Lebanon
matters, and scale matters.
And
so
Jordan.
when we talk about the population, it's
like
very
per capita.
significant. It's significant in Lebanon and in Jordan. Now we turned into a 10 million.
But this you would expect when there's a refugee exodus based on crisis. Not try and move out of culturally
that's
places.
what you would expect, but other countries that are also in the area basically took I wouldn't say zero, probably zero.
Of course, but from the refugee perspective, if they're genuine refugees, they would want to go to culturally similar places.
I'm just trying to make like a picture of the geography of the distribution of refugees, more or less, right? So there were other countries that are also in the region and just basically didn't take refugees, like Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states, right?
Yeah, they did not. They, however, fund them in Jordan, for example. So they... we will get to speak about Zaatari, but Zaatari's districts are named after donors. So one of the main streets I'm investigating is called the Saudi street, and there's the Omani, the Bahraini, the Korean, believe it or not.
So
it depends whoever.
They kind of outsourced host services or something like that.
Of course, you have to ask help from outside.
Yeah, it's
and I guess Jordan also, because
the king
you need some support.
Yeah, absolutely. The king was very, adamant on getting help and getting some media attention.
Something similar probably to what happened between this treaty between Greece and Turkey and the European Union and Turkey.
Yeah, I think so. However, not as brutal. So we don't have a role in kind of stopping refugees from getting out. I think Turkey has a role now to kind of stopping migration by all means.
Like a kind of gate or like a dam or something like that.
Yeah.
Another question I have is what is the demographics like how many male per female? Do you have any numbers?
It's almost 50-50. Okay. There's a data sharing portal of the UNHCR that updates very frequently, and it's a little bit higher for men, but not nothing like in Germany. I think the discussion was that most people who manage to make that trip are mostly young males.
Yes.
And no.
So generally that's one way that I look at it also. Like in Germany, the most of the refugees that I have encountered are young male.
And also I think the general statistics reveal.
So I don't know if I am being grossly incorrect, but maybe if you see that the percentages differ, you can realize whether there's an economic aspect. If they're economic migrants as well.
I agree.
So if you have a choice between the entire family, only one person can go, then you send in that one young male to go earn money and bring it back. So that aspect comes in. So that choice is there.
Yeah, this is always discussed when we talk about refugees in Germany, and I remember I was discussing this with you and you were opposing this idea, but Kleinschmidt, who was the ex-director of Zaatari, he was saying all of these refugees who come to Germany are economic refugees, and he didn't say it in the sense that we don't need them. He was sympathetic rather, but he said obviously after a crisis, if you're a war refugee, you go to a neighboring country. The minute you decide to make that trip to Europe, it's because you're seeking betterment of your quality of life, and this kind of defines you as rather an economic refugee.
I just think that the emphasis is a little bit misleading. Right.
Yeah.
If you start calling the refugees that make it to Germany or Sweden or European countries economic refugees, what gets into the imagination of the public is a completely different thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's no way for them to distinguish
Because-
between people
No,
fleeing
so-
war
so-
and people just...
but because also
trying
there's a reason their livelihood has been disrupted,
Yeah.
and it's war. So obviously,
I just it's like operationally, it's a kind of a misleading term.
Yeah.
So
But I guess he's trying to make to point out a little bit of difference. What they're seeking is a better quality of life.
No, and also it's first survival, and when it comes to survival, then the refugees that are coming out are everyone basically. And then the next step, like how can you make it slightly better for yourself?
Yeah,
so you send that one person to earn in a place where you can earn more.
yeah, I think a good way.
But that doesn't mean that they're not in the struggle.
Yeah, the way I try to picture this in my mind is kind of thinking of a sort of like a potential barrier. So the higher peak, or the most difficult decision to take is the decision to just leave the place and just move away. And once you decide that you are going to be on the way out, I think it takes probably a little bit less of an effort to take the decision to just, well, now that I'm anyway leaving my country and looking to have a better life, why don't I really try to improve it by more orders of magnitude, let's say.
I think there are many things to calculate. I think the trip itself was risky and
that's probably
and it's a serious investment at times.
This is what I wanted to say. It was I don't know, I heard various numbers, but up to 5,000 euros per person. That's a lot of money.
And it's risky and it's tough, and probably that also influences the fact that there are more men than women and children.
When you have the choice of sending one, then you send the most capable of earning by their conventional sense. That's what I hear from
the one who has less to lose or less attachments. So it's easier to imagine single men to take the trip, but not.
Now I have a question about Zaatari and the way it was installed in the beginning, at least. So, in contrast to, for instance, the way the refugees are distributed in Europe, which essentially they are distributed in European cities, Zaatari is isolated, right? It's not neighboring any major urban center.
Okay. So this is a good point. However, we can talk about Europe later. So yes, Zaatari is rather far from any major urban center. It's close to the border, and it rather happened simultaneously. So the UNHCR was creating it, and people were coming in big numbers and helped create it. And it's
was there a layout?
Growing. Yeah, I mean, there's a traditional layout for the UNHCR, which is usually a gridded layout. And if you see Zaatari, yes, you can see the districts and the grid zones, but you can see the first districts, and they really look like organically grown cities.
So it's not as planned as it was intended to be.
It's continuously being planned, but especially the first parts, there was you could never be faster than the people who are now creating their lives. So that's why they still have problems in these first zones. For example, I was just saying houses are attached to each other. They create hazards. For example, whenever you have a fire, a bunch of them burn down. The newer districts that they managed to design are having safety standards, distances between houses. They have streets. They have base course on the ground. Those houses were basically on sand. There were tents and became houses.
So there was a layout, but the nature of the layout.
The thing is that
they had tents, or what is it?
Yeah,
what kind of structure they had?
It was a tent exclusive space.
Was kind of flexible, or
it was not flexible. It was rather spontaneous, and it was so fast. So yes, they had tents, and they were overwhelmed by the numbers, and they had to act very fast. And refugees were acting themselves. The thing is that I'm saying it was spontaneous because it was not like another camp. For example, Azraq, who was
that's where I wanted to
designed from scratch. So if I design a camp from scratch and then put you there, it's a complete different process that I'm now exploring in Zaatari, which is this spontaneous bottom up growth that happens. So
before you move on, where is the Azraq camp?
Azraq is in another town. It's another
also
town.
In Jordan.
Yeah. It was opened 2 years after Zaatari actually. And funnily enough, it was opened as a lesson learned from Zaatari.
Yeah.
however, did not exhibit all the things. So just to go back to Zaatari to tell you, because the comparison I think really helps in making the point clear of why Zaatari is of interest. So Zaatari very soon, almost immediately, started having, for example, market streets. And sarcastically, I always mention this in my presentations, it's called the Champs-Élysées. And it was not named by refugees, but by journalists. But almost immediately, refugees were putting stalls, selling coffee on the gate or on the central street.
One important question, was that illegal at the time?
There is nothing called illegal. It's an informal activity of a new situation.
But there was no
rules against it or with it. It was super...
So I think that's something that is not clear for the Western world often, that at least the first world, that like even in India, most of the businesses that is happening in the streets are not really legal. Like there are no contracts and all made. So it comes out organically. Unless there is something imposed upon you, which suddenly says that it's not allowed, people continue doing these things.
What I'm trying to get at is, again, I'm just trying to kind of clarify the notions that probably part of the audience has about camps. Because I imagine that the majority of the population, the majority of people that might be listening to this, and you introduce the concept of a camp to them, probably they imagine that this is a much more regulated kind of place in terms of legality, right? That there will be some authorities trying to enforce laws for the refugees that do not allow them the same amount of flexibility and of decision making in comparison to normal citizens of the country living in the city. So that's what I'm saying.
It is true.
If people started, I can understand this in a city of any country first or probably third world is easier to just people start just putting up their stand and selling their stuff. But in the context of a camp, I would imagine that the majority of people think that such activities will be much more strongly regulated. So that's why I asked.
So what are you describing? What you're describing is really accurate when we discuss camps. So it's not like you have people and you tell them, here's Jordan, just enter and do whatever you want.
Survive.
You're contained in space. And the first phases are really critical because it's really hard to have this moment of organization. It happens through time and through what we call, I know Nacho is very sensitive on the words we use, what we call the everyday. It's a constructive element of space. And just to tell you the difference, I volunteered here in a reception center. So in Germany, they don't have the concept of permanent camps. They just have reception centers to put you there temporarily until they kind of give you I think 2 appointments, one with the court, one with a doctor to start your process of asylum. So it's a rather intermediate space for a tiny vetting.
And you're provided with some settlement in a building,
it could also be camps. Like here in Dresden, we had 2 camps. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yeah, but they were right within the city, right? It's not like an enclosed space.
But they were made of tents, huge tents that accommodated 30 people.
But it didn't.
They were temporary.
Like the camp here. I mean, people don't know, but here we are in an institute, a scientific institute, and just across the street there used to be. People used to call it a camp.
Hall.
I don't know what it was.
Yeah, it was a sports hall. The thing the point I'm trying to make is that it depends on the phase of the creation. So there are some authors who call it the emergency phase or the 0 hour. And this is so chaotic. So when I worked in the camp here, it was the beginning and it was every stereotype you have about camps. So completely chaotic, giving food is a big challenge. People don't trust you. People jump on the truck or try to kind of...
Can you get a bit candid and tell us some experiences in these camps?
Yeah, I can.
Because I think those things are probably of interest.
Yeah, it was a little
But we never got to the point, just as before that.
Yeah, just to say, as opposed to Zaatari, I went to Zaatari 4 years after its establishment. And it's a functioning city. It's not that I walk there and I have people... fighting for food or jumping on a truck of aid, or there's a system, there's a routine, and routine is so important in constructing a life. And I think when we perceive camps within time, it becomes so significant because you don't live in this temporary way of life forever. You reconstruct your life and it starts becoming ordered, and it's really hard to dismiss and try to call it temporary. And I think this point we did not make clear. That's the significant point of my research, is that there's a gap between what we have on the ground and our conceptualizations of camps. We keep thinking of them as temporary, and we keep thinking of refugees as victims who are dependent on aid. And on the ground, we can see traces of, or at least my findings are indicating that I'm talking about agents, active agents who construct space, who reconstruct their life, and of settlements that resemble more like cities, but I'm not even saying cities. I call them exceptional.
But they will have a sense of uncertainty.
Sure.
In these camps, which is not there in regular cities. Like they don't know how long they're staying there. So it's like a temporary city in there.
But at the same time, you also see how camps rework some significant aspects like belongings, identities, and subjectivities. So the people I interviewed in Zaatari, no one is super proud to say, I'm living in a camp, I'm a refugee, this is what I imagine for my kids. However, you can see how defensive they become when you talk about Zaatari. They represent themselves to this place.
They already are developing a sense of belonging, or
some
which
sort
is bound
of
to
identity.
be if you're living there for 6-7 years.
Sure.
Or is it's almost 6 years then?
6 years, yeah.
So there will be identity, there will be landmarks. Are there schools in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course there will be schools in there. And with teachers from within how much of Jordanian involvement is in there?
In the beginning it was much more, and now much less. So now the tendency is to try to employ as many refugees on a daily base missions. So I pay you per day.
Okay.
And
so they're daily wage earners.
Yeah, and other than the market. And the thing is that there are new social hierarchies that are being built with your work status. Yeah. And this has already been explored in the literature in other camps. For example, this like the bigger camp on earth, the largest scale, is called Dadaab. It's in Kenya, and there are refugees from different parts of the world, and you can see how they have their status based on their jobs. So the highest status, if I remember correctly, was for those who work with the NGOs. And then you have the traders, as you have like a pyramid basically of status. And that's very significant, because it seems like you build new affiliations coming to the camps. So regardless of where you were or what kind of status you had, you reconstruct that.
So this kind of concept, this whole concept of refugee camps is very different from how I perceive it from back in India.
Okay, but the thing is, I think you can make a categorization between camps and refugee settlements, right?
Sure.
And I don't know what is the best way to draw the dividing lines between one category of camps or one category of a refugee settlement and a different one. That's why I try to kind of allude to the fact that Zaatari, it's an isolated space, not attached to an urban center, and it's separate, and it has a demarcation, and there's I suppose there's restriction of movement between. People are not just allowed to just walk out.
It also has the definition of a camp. So historically, the Palestinian camps have been very adjacent to cities, but they're still camps, as opposed to the other part of kind of refugees, and they're called urban refugees or non-camp dwellers, and they inhabit urban areas. They sometimes live in informality, like we were discussing the Calcutta example, or it's just I think
going to that, because you sent us a paper just to get it prepared for this conversation, because probably you have more experience with this, but I really have zero, basically. So everything I know I've learned very recently. And in this paper, they talk about two other examples of migration, large-scale migration of refugees. There's this example of the Palestinians moving after the creation of Israel in 1948 to Lebanon, particularly to Beirut. And there's the other example of Bengalis after the
from
partition.
Bangladesh, then East Pakistan.
1947, which basically is our
the Bengali one was like two-folds. Like one was during our independence war, when the British left, and then they said, okay, Muslims and Hindus reorganize. So there was mass killing and everything, all kind of chaos going on, where the Hindus were trying to get into India and the Muslims were trying to get into East and West Pakistan.
Okay, but what I wanted...
But that didn't happen. So there you had a few refugees going in, but then you had the next set of refugees going on when Bangladesh had its independence war.
And that was
Pakistan.
In 47?
No, that was in 71.
71.
But I think the paper is mentioning the 47
yes.
refugees, yeah.
Yes.
So the point I wanted to make is that, so I read in the paper the names of these camps just to look, I wanted to see like satellite pictures of the camps just to get an idea of how they look like. And the case of Beirut, I think is Al-Shatila or Shatila camp,
yeah.
Other names that I cannot remember. But the point is that I was a little bit surprised to find out that they are within Beirut. So they're essentially enmeshed in the city.
I mean, it's interesting, yeah. I mean, you make your point.
It's the same. Yeah. It's the same for the case of the Bengali refugees. They are in Kolkata, in Calcutta.
Yeah, no, in other parts also, but they're settled within cities.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's what I'm.
So it's not an external cities of just refugees going in there.
Yeah, that's what I'm going. That's what I'm trying to get at. So I imagine the dynamics of the settlement, the way this kind of settlements evolve, might be rather different from the case of Zaatari, which is an isolated.
The thing is that the Calcutta example is rather different than the case of Zaatari because it has never been a camp. It was a sort of informality and people squatting and taking over empty lands, basically, that the government or the state possess. But the Shatila example is rather similar with the exception of the geographic distance from cities. So initially Shatila was on the edge of Beirut, basically, let's say. So this is Beirut and this is Shatila, and with this urban sprawl, Beirut kind of accommodated Shatila. But Shatila is very much a refugee camp. It has this demarcation or like identity. It's also a significant part of the civil war.
Are there like checkpoints for?
It had. I don't know what's happening now in Shatila, and it had a big role, and it's actually it's well known to the public because of the massacre that happened during the civil war. And there was moments
when you comment on that a little bit more, because I don't know if people know about this.
Well, during the civil war,
this is in the 70s.
Refugees were trapped. I can't give you an exact year. I would think 80s. The Shatila massacre. It was in
the civil war started in 71 till 90.
It lasted 15 years. Yeah.
75 till 90.
13 years. So the thing is
in
that
Jordan.
No. This is the Lebanese civil war.
Yeah.
And refugees were trapped inside. There was also an involvement from the Israelis, so they managed to kind of siege refugees inside, and barbaric killing took kind of days and nights. And many are to blame now. So the Lebanese army has been taken responsibility, but also the Israelis, and then Sharon has always been criticized for this responsibility. But
and that happened when this camp was already engulfed within the city, within Beirut.
I can't answer this. Okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, if it hadn't been, it was very, very adjacent. The thing is that about this camp, there's another paper by Ediana Martin, and she said that it also provided cheap space for those who wanted to work in Beirut but could not afford Beirut. So kind of like living, I don't know, in the banlieue in Paris or whatever, kind of cheaper ghetto accommodations. My point about it being a camp is that it's very important because it's defined as a camp, and you kind of carry either the stigma or the label of existing in that space because you're a refugee. So refugees in urban spaces, they can have a certain level of freedom moving around, and you can argue for both sides. So maybe you can become more anonymous as an urban refugee, so you don't have the label, you don't carry it. I'm a refugee. In the camp you always carry it. And the thing about camps, especially when neglected, is that they kind of develop their own power geometries, and we also saw that in Zaatari. So they can create a fertile ground for crime or drugs or whatever. And we saw some examples, for example, in the Lebanese civil war or in the September events in Jordan, or there are several examples. But
how different are they, or how similar are they with respect to slums, for instance?
I think they're very comparable to slums, the way they grow and this bottom-up urbanism.
Except often refugees will get some sort of privileges.
The thing is that they have tax rebates or something. They have aids, and they have. This is why I call it this functioning exceptionality. So I met some refugees in Zaatari. Interestingly enough, they did the opposite migration. So you would expect people to just want to get out of the camp. So I met some people who tried to make it in Jordan, obviously not in Amman because it's an expensive city. So let's say in other cities like Irbid or Mafraq, and they said that they struggled a lot because it's so hard to get a work permit, and you're prone to exploitation. You're paying higher rents.
You're treated differently.
Yeah. And inside the camp, not only are you not paying rent or electricity or any of these expenses, you have a higher chances of work. So you can always kind of open up your shop. And the process to open a shop is literally you go and open your shop. There are no permits or anything for creating the shop. The permits you will need permits for products to get them in and out of the camp, but they're also super facilitated as opposed to other activities. Like it's easier to get products in and out of the camp than getting a permit to leave the camp for they call it a license.
And so basically there most of the settlements, most of the houses are semi-permanent kind of.
No, not yet. I mean, they're now more permanent. We call this process kind of materializing your permanence. So as I said, they started as tents, and it was very problematic living in a desert with a tent and this very kind of flexible structure also made people rather gather around their families or people so that they defend themselves, right? Because if I go to work and leave my tent, then someone will steal it. It was the first days of creating Zaatari. People didn't know each other. And
but there is some sense of order and self-assembly happening now.
Yeah. Now it's also changed. So in the beginning, you had to kind of defend. This is what they call in Arabic. They say they don't say I settled here. They say I defended here by my family. And then slowly,
I conquered this area.
kind of. But so they moved into this zinco structures, which are like metal sheets that you surround.
Okay, just to frame this, because I don't know exactly how to proceed from it, because there are several kind of questions that I find very, very interesting, and I don't want to jump so chaotically from one like subtopic to the next. So what we're talking about now is the sort of structural evolution of the camp. From
the materialization of the camp.
From a more sketchy kind of settlement with some layout, but also allowing some flexibility for the settlers to modify their environment and how they chose to modify this environment and turning essentially the camp into something that you don't want to call a city, but an urban space that resemble to some degree a city-like settlement, an urban settlement. So that's one process that I find very, very interesting for different reasons. I think, after all, I'm a physicist and you are too, and probably some part that interests me or probably us regarding that aspect is how people do like self-organize to produce this. So you have a complex system of people trying to make a living, and in doing so they will modify the spaces around them.
And it's never going to be anarchy for long. There is some sort
there's
of
some level of ground up organization, and so that's interesting. I was also interested in this issue about you mentioned that there was at least some period, I don't know exactly when, where the camp was more or less crime-ridden. There was a lot of criminality, and there are parallels, I think, between that situation in that camp and refugee settlements in general, when they are not allowed, for instance, to enter the workforce in their destinations and stuff like that. So
makes sense.
That happens, and we can talk about that. I just recently was also in preparation for this conversation. I learned that in the Netherlands, and I think it's also something that happens here in Germany, is that people apply for asylum, and sometimes they are rejected the asylum, but they are not deported. So they still stay in the country, but
you get like
illegally
three attempts. But you get 3 attempts of
what I wanted to say is that in the Netherlands there's a case ongoing now of people that have been denied asylum but are still in the Netherlands, and they are basically squatting now in abandoned buildings, and they are scared of leaving the buildings and going out to the streets because so it's creating a sort of informal, scattered, refugee-like camp situation, which is really strange.
But this aspect, I come across on a day-to-day basis?
I think we all do here. Here in Dresden, those who are refused asylum, I think those who were not Syrians or Iraqis, I guess the North Africans, their asylum has been denied, but they're not deported, as you said, and as a result, they cannot get a traditional job, so they're handling drugs or
and are they entitled to welfare or not anymore?
I don't think they
so,
are.
Right? So it's really a problem.
Yeah, it's problematic.
What
it's
do you
kind
do
of
there?
a problem that needs kind of policy. Or
I think one thing to be clear is when your case is going on, you can get it rejected 3 times before they deport you.
Yeah, when you say that you deal with this,
so most of the time when you hear that, so when I say I deal with it on a day-to-day basis is because I play cricket in Dresden.
I thought you were going to disclose your secret identity as an asylum seeker.
I thought you were just gonna say you pass by those drug dealers.
No. So what I'm saying is, cricket is a refugee sport in Germany. So on a day-to-day basis, because we are dealing with a lot of Afghani refugees, not Syrian refugees, but Afghani refugees. So you keep hearing whose case is in which stage. Some of these guys are actually quite decent, so we try to push their cases as well. And of course you hear recently 2 of them, we just heard that they just escaped their way to Italy.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know why they went to Italy. And then one of them came back again. So there's so much chaos and uncertainty in their lives.
I think this situation of having having your asylum denied is really problematic because it could last for years. I don't know if you guys remember the story of the Munich metro video of some people assaulting an old guy, and then these people have been living with a denied asylum for 4 years.
Okay.
So we always talk about kind of this pending status when we talk about refugees. You're always stuck in an undefined
and it's been worse than that, right? I don't remember which one of the several terrorist acts was also perpetrated by somebody that was denied asylum.
Was it the Christmas market?
The Tunisian?
I don't know if he was a denied asylum, but he was. Turkey has already warned about him. This is what I remember.
I don't know. It's a
No,
mess.
but the other one is also interesting. If there's a sense of resentment for eventually being denied asylum, they can react violently.
Yeah, but that is kind of hardly a justification.
But I don't think it's about resentment. It's about having no other way to kind of get money. So you engage in.
But honestly,
illegal
I have probably interacted with maybe about 40 to 60 Afghans and other refugees here. And there's very few of them who have actually been deported.
Yeah, I don't.
Of course, it's anecdotal with a little bit of statistics.
Yeah, probably none. I don't know if you know, but what is the argument there? I mean, what is the argument for not deporting somebody that has been denied asylum? What is it? Do you know?
I went to a conference. Where was it? In Frankfurt, and I remember that they said but it's not a confirmed information. It's just one presentation. They said in Germany, with the history of the Nazi regime, that they don't deport people that easily just for historical
guilt, something like that.
Sort of.
So it's not a legal argument. It's more like a.
But it is happening. The thing is
ethical.
At that moment, I assume that no deportations take place, but actually they do take place. But I think very, very carefully and slowly. And I think this. How do you say?
But it is happening. It is happening. So I get the sense of it. People were not scared about it. At least, like in a cricket club, you get the sense that they are more and more uncertain because these are especially the Pakistani refugees, because they have less of a reason to be here seeking asylum in comparison to Syria, and because you're supporting the genuine cases of asylum seekers. You are trying to get rid of all the pending.
They kind of classified the crises, and also East European refugees were denied asylum. So I don't know what
I'm
happened
just really
to them.
So I think the process has started. Like you get the sense of it.
Sure. I'm just really curious about this because I think a lot of people might be wondering, how does this happen? So people go to an office to do their application for asylum, and then at some point they get an answer, right? It's accepted or denied,
it's
or
not
something
that simple.
like that.
I think you get, so that's why you have these phases of accommodation. In the beginning, in this reception center, what you wait for is a date where you go to the court and apply. And a second thing was, a first step is to get a health check, then you get this date. And after you get this date in the court and you get like a temporary permit, you're allowed to rather move within Germany outside of these temporary settlements. But it could take years until you're given a final asylum.
Exactly, but I don't know exactly.
And often not at all.
Yeah.
Often it just stays pending.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I'm not trying. The process might be tortuous and might be complicated and dragging over time, but there is a point in which there's a decision, right? Mm-hmm. So and this decision happens in an office, or they get a letter, or how do they get to know the final decision? And why is it the case that after that decision takes place, I think people might be inclined to wonder, what do they tell them? Like, okay, you are denied, but you are also free to go.
I don't know about
how does that happen?
I really don't know, but we can ask. I already am in touch with some refugees, and we can ask. I heard some stories, but they're all rumor based because I don't know these people of like families getting kind of separated or whatever. So I don't.
So this thing is for sure that they are designated. So they have an official place to live, which is given by the government. So they all their mails reach there. Not always.
The ones who are denied asylum
until their pending case is completely denied. So once it's denied, you can again protest, not protest, but what is the word for
appeal?
Appeal. Yeah.
What happened to the camp here? Do you know?
It's no longer functioning. The thing is that Germany is no longer accepting these numbers. We don't have the same flow of refugees now. And as I said, it's only temporary. After a certain moment, there are 2 treatments. So yes, they have these kind of buildings where they accommodated refugees. And it's a sort of like old hotel buildings where you have a bedroom and a living room and a kitchenette. And you put refugees, you even give them aid. I think it was difficult to allow them to cook. But once they get their permit, they just rent houses normally, and I think welfare pays for their rent, or they resemble any welfare
recipient.
Yeah.
So I guess. Sorry. Go on.
What were you, I know that you were doing something in the camp here. What was your role?
I was supposedly meant to translate, and I proved very, very inefficient in the context of the camp. Or in those days, I was way better in other refugee settlements because it was, as I said, all the stereotypes you have in mind about the chaotic refugee camps that is loud and hot. And I remember
how many days
boss,
were you?
No, only one visit.
So can you tell us how the visit was?
Yeah, I can tell you. So I went to the camp actually, and you're marked as the newcomer. So people have a sense of their space and who works there.
It's like all these prison movies.
It's very similar. It's very similar. And I remember my boss... needed to use the toilets, and I was just standing, and you can see slowly people are surrounding you, so watching you, not to attack you, but rather looking at the stranger who's here.
Curious to see a new specimen.
But it was really disturbing because it was completely out of order. So you see a truck of food coming, and they told me it's the Red Cross here who has the like the administrative role of camps. In other parts of the world, it's always UNHCR. And they tell you we bring, for example, double the amount of needed food. There's no shortage in food, you can get. But the attitude on the lack of trust is that let's catch the truck.
Were you in charge of telling them that they had more than enough food?
No.
Did somebody tell them?
I mean, the camp had already been there for 6-7 months.
I'm just trying to explain why would they
were used to it.
Chaotically rush towards food.
Because the sense of emergency was still there. It was still new. And I think once you start establishing a routine and a daily life, you start having a trust. But at that moment, this was not established. It was really what they called the 0 hour, like very new. And I think at that moment, even the German system didn't know how to deal with anyone. So I really wanted to help and translate, and I had a different agenda in the back of my head. I wanted to find people who came from Zaatari, just in case I couldn't enter the camp, and maybe interview them here. And I think it was a mess of those who want to help and a mess of refugees. And by the end, no one could navigate through the emails of all the volunteers who want to help, and no one could really kind of manage. So we had organized an event for kids and women, and it got, because many people organized different events, they received a different message. I think the refugees were told, we're going to take you to the zoo. And then we had a big dilemma convincing them there's no zoo. We only want women and children. And I proved
so the males
were... Yeah, because we were selective, only families, and then... it was so hard because within this chaos, there was one way to speak, and there was a couple of security men, and it's extreme screaming. It's ridiculous big men screaming with this really theatrical voice, like, and then my boss will scream something in English and tell me, go ahead, translate. So, and then,
like what kind of thing?
And in a setting where you're surrounded more and more and more with people, and I was becoming more and more and more shy, and I discovered I don't have a voice to speak to the crowds.
You don't have the magnetic personality to
very,
transcend boundaries.
Element.
But the question here
in
is...
But in Zaatari, which is so interesting, I did not have any problem of this sort. It's a city that functions. You just knock on the door, you tell people, hey, how are you? Can I talk to you? That's how it functions,
But do you think part of the problem is... in here, of course, it's people from a completely different culture. So the Germans don't even know what to expect to start with, and then they are trying to. And also here you have a lot more regulations.
Do you find them naive in their approach?
The Germans? No, the thing is that some of the people from the Red Cross were, for example, I met this guy who's a Lebanese German. So he's been born here, but of Lebanese parents, and he kind of gets the cultural code. So he told me, I can't believe it, but I have to yell at everyone to be listened to, even if they're old men. So he understands the cultural code. It's really, you're not supposed to kind of raise your voice in front of an elderly in the Middle East. So he realizes that and yells at them. I also
yell for what? Yell for organizing them to.
Yeah, but also to be listened to.
To get across.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to,
because it's so much chaos.
But I'm trying
so
to
much uncertainty.
The tone is loud and unpredictable. So there's no such way. Hey, listen to me. Let me tell you. For example, I was a translator, right? No one believed that I had no power there. So they will come to me. Oh, please, can you help me postpone my court?
Exactly, that's what I want to get at.
And I tried a couple of times to say, I'm only a translator. And by the end, I started saying, I will try. Because there was no point.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Because it sounds as if you put a foot inside the camp and then people start yelling for no reason. No, it's like you enter with a certain mission in your mind. You're going to do something.
I mean,
and then people approach you to do what or say what?
Yeah, but again, to clarify, this was the initial stages.
Sure.
I'm just trying Germany.
But I am also getting to the other point here that maybe in closed spaces like refugee camps, like in case of Zaatari,
it's not bad.
The self-organization actually helps them to even trust and put their feet around. Like here, because there are German interventions going in, so they're always feeling like they don't belong. But I guess the sense of belonging is a bit stronger when you are given to do some things on your own.
I think we... so this does not happen overnight. So I think Zaatari exhibited similar amount of chaos in the beginning. If not
but
more
here you are talking about like 6-7 months. So in Zaatari also in the first 6-7, like when you talk about the 0th hour,
the thing is that Zaatari developed very soon kind of clan-like attitudes and similar also to tribe kind of people
organization.
Also collected over each other. So maybe they kind of had some sort of new laws or laws dependent on space. But it was problematic, and there was a crucial point where, I think we keep missing the point because I never really narrated how Zaatari happened, and maybe we can step into this. Just to close the German example, it's not a good comparison because Zaatari is a 6-year-old settlement, and the German example was not meant to be organized. It was meant to be literally temporary. So it was just. Hold on these couple of days. You can say from a month to 3 up until...
So the uncertainty is far, far more for the people also. No, in case of people here. Like, they know this is a temporary camp, they will be moved here or there.
But uncertainty in the sense of...
for the refugees, they don't know
when will they come to
move
move me.
But I think I disagree with you about that because in here, the camp is definitely temporary, and you're getting out of a camp to a shelter.
Yes.
In Zaatari, no, you have to imagine some sort of prolongation of your exile and life inside of a camp.
But what I'm saying is that uncertainty isn't there.
But it's
like,
not
I'm talking about the other kind of
but I cannot imagine that being a huge psychological factor, because
I would assume so.
Because what she said, I think makes it kind of clear. They know they're going to be moved, and they know that it's not going to be a matter of years. They know the uncertainty is in the sense of exactly where. Is it going to be here?
So maybe an easier way to put this point across is when you're here in Germany and you want to move somewhere else.
You can.
No, what I'm saying is here you're still moving somewhere in Europe. There they know when they move, they're only moving back to Syria. So it's there or back home. So there is a sense of certainty there. Like now you're so far away.
In a way, I kind of get your point, but I still think the German example, with the exception that there's a big cultural gap, but the German example functions better in the sense that they have control on their life in a very future decided dates, and then they can reunite with families somewhere. They're not
in Germany.
Yeah. For example, you just have to go through the process, and then you can go meet your brother somewhere else. You don't need to stay in Dresden.
If they are also in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking with the scale of Germany. So the thing is that, they have this rule of distributing refugees according to different
You're allotted
states.
a city and you have no control over it.
So this is also temporary. Once you get your permanent, not even temporary residence permit, you can go and live with your brother. You're allowed to do anything you want.
So in the German context, if segregation occurs, it's rather voluntarily afterwards. It's also a process of self-assembly. They decide to live in communities together, right? Yeah. Here in Zaatari, it's not the case at all.
I mean, you have to keep in mind that in Zaatari, it's not per se out of choice that you stay. You realize some benefits later on, but the significant part and the reason Zaatari lasted and became a city is because there was no way out of it, and the exile lasted longer. And almost every interview I had was of someone telling me, I thought I'm coming for 2 weeks. This is the story of Zaatari. And then you discover that, okay, I'm staying longer and I have more needs. And
I have a question to go back to the evolution of Zaatari. You say, and it's the case, it's a fact, that it has transitioned from a camp into some sort of urban settlement, and that the people started setting up a market, choosing this Champs-Élysées street to be like the commercial kind of avenue of the camp and so on. And in my mind, I have this big question: how can that happen if the authorities do not remain at the market? The authorities have to somehow play a marginal role in order for those developments to occur, right? What is the position of the authorities? Because it seems like they are kind of loose or kind of turn a blind eye somehow.
No, they're of extreme facilitation.
Or has it been like a negotiation, like a struggle?
Like they get free electricity and water and all the basic amenities. So the Jordanian government is doing something.
Yeah, but there's a story for that. Okay, I can... maybe it makes more sense if I just tell you guys how the camp came to be. Because if I want to say about electricity and water, so it did not all happen, and Zaatari did not come up all at once as the city it is today. And I always kind of narrated through the markets, which is where I based my study. And the thing is that the very first step that made people sell things, of course, first days I told you some people were selling coffee, and it was just being in a desert dependent on aid. But aid was their single resource, and people were also getting sick of this aid because I give you decided meals every day, so chicken every Sunday. Or I give you this aid package, which also I met refugees here in Germany who told me the aid package gives me things I don't want. So, for example, some guy told me they used to give me flour, they used to give me sardines, and they were living in tents. So what do you do with flour when you don't have an oven to bake? And at that time, there were many Jordanian workers like cleaning these public toilets. At that time, there were public toilets in Zaatari. And they would, for example, negotiate. We'll tell this Jordanian worker, how about I give you my flour and you bring me tomatoes or to bring me onions from... And those smuggled goods became the first resources people started exchanging.
Sure.
And
question there. Authorities, what did they do? Did they know?
The thing is that you could see people just, at that time, it was not even a stall, it was a mat. People sitting on a mat on the ground, just exchanging goods.
I think my question, this can only happen if the authorities, to some degree, turn a blind eye.
If we want to talk about authorities, at that time, officially speaking, the camp is under this joint administration, so UNHCR and Jordanian government.
UN plays an important role there.
Yeah. And officially speaking, the Jordanian security did not really enforce its power until later on, and I will mention this. At that moment, they were rather surrounding the camp and not letting
because
access.
It's a ridiculous number of people have suddenly come in. So you first try and just make sure that everything is just about working, functioning.
And,
so you don't get into the nitty-gritty.
For example, it was also so problematic to realize how many people are there, how many people are getting born every day, and how many people are in need of what. For example, I don't know who needs diapers, who needs health help, and that's why they used, in the beginning, they used refugees to report. So I give you the street, I give you that street, you report on your zones. So those first goods kind of form these, I call them mini markets, so little basic goods to be sold. And very soon afterwards, so when we talk about displacement, we talk about these issues that are married to these phenomenon, and one of which is the state of idleness that is created by this culture of dependence, which is why I'm against the humanitarian perception of camps, because if you live depending on my aid, and if you just wait for me to give you aid, we create this state of passivity of people doing nothing.
Sounds almost parasitic somehow.
Yeah, and this is.
It makes people uncomfortable. I would say human psyche doesn't work on aid all the time. Yeah.
So most narratives included big descriptions of the suffering of the first days, specifically due to the fact that I had nothing to do. I was sitting with my wife crying. I cry here, she cries there. That's a part of every narrative almost. And then what was a turning point is that people started informally connecting themselves with this electrical grid. So we had the street lights. So they managed to connect themselves with electricity, which is a huge difference. It means your quality of life is different. You have possibilities for TV, for mobile phones, for internet, and these immediately started appearing in the camp.
So the first job there was of an electrician.
Of an electrician, of course. All of these resources, you have to think of them as things that gave you power and privilege. So anyone who controlled a street lamp charged.
This is widespread practice in
build a society. A society builds itself.
Yeah.
But stealing electricity is something very, very normal in our part of the world.
I think
but here it sounds like more like a challenge, right?
But because officially speaking, the UNHCR, when they gave electricity, they didn't give electricity. They gave these solar kind of lamps that kind of collect energy during the day, and at night you kind of move them and they can light some of your space. And once they started informally connecting themselves, they had to pay $1 billion or quasi-billion euro bill, and the Jordanian government refused to kind of reduce the bill.
But they will not cut the electricity.
So they had to regulate it. That was the moment. Okay, now you cannot informally connect yourself, but we regulate it and we connect each of you.
It's
and
like
now they have a very
forceful negotiation through action.
For example, as opposed. I will move to Azraq later on, but let me just finish the Zaatari example. But this was a huge
electricity.
Not only change of quality of life in terms of TV, shops, internet. It also made many things possible, because if I have electricity, I can have a bridal shop. I can do hair and use these hair dryers. I can have all these electrically.
I can have some forms of entertainment. Entertainment becomes very essential.
Entertainment is so essential when we talk about idleness, but also about taking action and thinking of a livelihood. All machines require electricity. So if you have these old traditional ice cream machines, so they need to be electrically powered. All of this became possible with electricity, and we started having all these varieties. The funny thing is that when you ask people, how did you come to Zaatari, what did people tell you? They will tell you, bring your own cord. That's the most important advice, because you need a cord to connect yourself informally, basically, like a cable.
What about drainage?
The thing is, this has been a problem that has improved slowly. I don't know what is happening exactly.
Because they had public toilets, so I'm assuming that the houses themselves didn't have flowing water.
Yeah,
but now they would.
They have their own toilets now, and this is my next step. What I wanted to tell you, but they not only do they have that, they also have this water treatment plant. So you have underground system that is functioning better than the Jordanian pool. So there's at least an image of a 10-year Zaatari, even more, because now we're past 6 years. The second step that was very important is that they started materializing their permanence, if Nacho allows my expressions. So
I understand what it means.
Yeah, meaning they're no longer living in structures like a tent or a zinco structure. They have what we call caravans or containers. But these containers are not movable because they have concrete bases. And concrete is so important because your structure is fixed. And this meant so many things. It meant, for example, I no longer need to live next to my family to protect my belongings. I can move my caravan next to my job or next to my wife's family. It also meant that I have what resembles a home. I have a private structure. I have a toilet. I can add my own caravan and have a guest area and a private area, and then I need to furnish this. So this also created this wave of shops that were meant for houses that started looking like homes. So they started needed utensils or mattress shops or tailor shops to furnish the house, to create curtains, to create all of these things.
And this repurposing of structure happened in a clandestine way. I watched a documentary, and there was this German Mr. I forgot his name. That was kind of the head of the camp.
Kleinschmidt.
Yeah, that guy. And he appears in some scene saying, during the night we left here some structures, and now you come the next day and the structures are not there, and they find them in the forming the walls of the house of someone else.
Sure. Right? People are being innovative. I can amuse them.
There are many funny stories. I heard
we
stories
are proper scavengers when we need to.
I heard funny stories of paving, like putting the base course on Zaatari and people taking the pavement away. I mean, no one knows what you need by the asphalt. But what's so interesting driving to Zaatari is that you see the UNHCR tents being used somewhere in the empty lands. Obviously, these are not refugees. These are people who bought the tents. And just to give you an idea, the trade is happening with and out of the camp.
Sure.
And
I would assume you get a different kind of clothes, different kind of food or something. So even Jordanians are probably coming in and buying stuff.
This is also true, and they're coming particularly for reputation. So our food is quite similar, our cuisine is quite similar, but they say, no, we want the Syrian pickles. They have these eggplant pickles. There's an article about, what is it called? Makdous, and you would see them kind of queuing. Of course, it also came with many other social dilemmas. So people came to marry a Syrian wife because of the reputation that they're also beautiful. So it was also
Jordanians came to marry.
I mean, there are reported stories. I mean, it could also be only rumors, but I'm saying there's some sort of exchange between.
And what's the demographics of Syrians in Jordan before the crisis? Like what percentage of Syrians?
I don't know, but the thing is that you can exist.
But there is a number. There is a percentage.
There are those who existed in Jordan before the crisis. There are those who are half Jordanian, half Syrian. So a friend of mine, he's of a Syrian father. So he's always been called the Syrian because his passport is Syrian. And he's lived in Jordan all his life. He's even lived in a village. So if you meet him in person, his way of speaking is way more Jordanian than mine, and only recently is he having some sort of trouble to kind of
because he's categorized in a different status then.
The thing is that now this has been resolved because now Jordanian moms can give some sort of privileges to their kids, but it's only recently that now we notice who's Syrian here, because before you needed nothing. You don't need a residence permit to live in Jordan as a Syrian, and now you do.
I have 3 questions, and I think it's. I hope we can cover them in whatever amount of time we have left, because we're over the 1 hour mark. But okay, we can extend a little bit. But I think it's possible. So the first one is related to the case of Azra, and why it didn't evolve in a similar manner that Zaatari did. The second one is if it seems to me that it seems to me that in a way Zaatari is kind of like a city now, and if I don't see how this camp is going to be at some point dissolved, and it's going to stay somehow. What do you have any idea of what the perception of Jordanians would be about having another city now suddenly there and mostly populated by Syrians? And the third one is I think it's a little bit of the controversial question, which is after you've done your research, and I think generally the image that people have about refugee camps is very negative, and I want to know if you have something positive to say about camps, if they are probably not so bad after all. So, Azraq?
Yeah. We can start with
Azraq?
Azraq.
That name, okay.
You can say Azraq. So Azraq was this camp that was created in 2014, as I said, and it was, as I said, a lesson learned from Zaatari. So what I didn't mention in the narrative of Zaatari is that it also accommodated so much crime and mafia groups. And at a certain moment, Jordanian police had to very strictly intervene and create this deportation policy. So it's called expelling or throwing something out, literally. It's called al-qadf. Yeah. And after this intervention, they kind of neutralized the camp and the dynamics of the camp to have the city we have now that is rather peaceful with little trouble. So as a lesson learned from Zaatari, during the time that it was crime-riddled, they designed Azraq, and they, of course, from scratch, they shipped refugees there. They designed it in a concept of villages, so different than the normal layout of, let's say, UNHCR, not a grid, it's like, anyway, like a hexagon something. Anyway, they made it in a future plan to accommodate 150,000 refugees, but currently the structure can support 50,000 refugees. And up until recently, today I checked, and apparently it has 30,000 refugees, so not a bad number. But up until recently,
like
it did not grow to accommodate, like, to the initial plan or to its premise. And up until recently, they did not have electricity. They're very much controlled, and they were shipped there and controlled there, and their life was kind of dictated. And this also kind of put on pause the bottom-up processes that are associated with kind of being spontaneous or growing organically. So they did not have electricity until very recently. They did not have a market. They had like a shopping mall that comes as standard in the layout. And it was very interesting because they wanted them to do shops and to have to follow the Zaatari model. So they started kind of building them shops. So they did not kind of build themselves. And now they have a kind of an agreement, some sort of 50% of the shops are owned by refugees and 50% are by the local community to encourage some sort of interaction. It just did not exhibit the same features that Zaatari is exhibiting. And there are some question marks. So some people in Zaatari told me that they're so scared of the deportation policy because it gives you two possibilities: either go back home to Syria or go to Azraq. And everyone in Zaatari would tell you, I will never go to Azraq.
Deportation is deportation from the camp, not from the country.
Yeah, not necessarily from the country. You could be deported depending on the kind of crime you've been committing. But it was very interesting for me, the fact that refugees within Zaatari already know that we have a better space. We will not go to Azraq.
Which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Because in principle, Azraq was designed, and probably the initial structures were more solid, more resembling like proper houses and stuff like that, and more organized.
Yeah.
And that somehow it's not appealing for
it's starting to pick up, but it's rather always continuously top bottom, and this kind of makes me doubt. Initially I wanted to do this comparative
so you
study,
like the bottom, the emergent property, not the
absolutely.
We're going to get that
but
at
I
the
think
end.
But I think all architects emphasize this. We can't have an ideal bottom up situation. It doesn't work, as I said, because it comes with their own power geometries. And I'm smiling because Nacho's very sensitive to these words, but we need some kind of a mixed strategy approach, and maybe Azraq will pick up and start exhibiting these features, but up until this point it's not. And
but do Did you talk to people in Azraq?
No.
So this might be a very biased narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. So my source is only some news sources and some people in Zaatari.
And the growth rate perhaps also says something.
Yeah, but it's growing. I mean, if it's now 30,000 people, it has already grown than the last 2 years. 2 years ago when I checked, it was less than 15,000. It was 8,000 inhabitants.
Yeah. Okay.
The thing is that initially my aim was to do this comparative study, but it would have required so much time.
Yeah.
And now, what about the prospect of Zaatari being a Jordanian city? A Jordanian population that is just there to stay? Is that...
I don't know about this. I think Zaatari, so the example of camps lasting forever are not unprecedented. So they exist everywhere. Not only, I mean, the Palestinian crisis or example is a very good example and rich of cases because of what is called the symbolic political claim of them, and that Palestinians want the status of refugees for their claim to the land. But there's also other examples like Dadaab, the largest refugee camp on earth. It's always planned to close, and it's never closing. Every year we have these announcements.
Yeah. All these refugee settlements that I see in India, they have been there forever.
Yeah,
and
it's just...
and some often you have people migrating back and then coming back again because they've got used to the setup is not familiar.
But I imagine that's easier
because if it goes on for generations.
Yeah.
Then
but that's exactly the point. But there was a turning point that still in Zaatari we still did not reach it, and in Palestinian camps actually they already understand the significance of cement, because cement is a very material way to prove that you exist. And in Zaatari so far refugees have not been allowed to build with cement unless it's an urban furniture like a fountain. It's okay, the ground is okay, but if you build it, they call it a block. So building blocks is still not allowed, and it's not because refugees are not ready; they're completely ready for that stage. It's because this is still not allowed.
But the interesting thing is, like from whatever parallels I can draw from other places, there is a geographical segregation,
so
which might make it a very interesting case study in comparison to everything else. Because if it is something with it, or if suppose Jordan kind of grows and kind of encapsulates that, over time you will find that the boundaries become shadier and shadier, which cannot happen.
Yeah, the thing is that I agree with you. So the geographical exceptionality of Zaatari could be its weakest point, but it could also work differently because now it's a big and rich economy. So it's not only a rich economy for, it's a wrong word, I should not say rich, but it's a vivid economy. Yeah. But it's not only benefiting the camp, it's benefiting Jordanian traders. So this kind of line of trade is working, and it's bringing life there. So the fact that it's isolated,
it's like an exile city. So in India, in the Himalayas in India, like every now and then you find so there is one place called Kasol, which is up in the Himalayas, where you're going through a religious destination here, a touristic destination here. In the middle, when you're passing by to Kasol, you suddenly find there are only Iranians living there. So it's an isolated Iranian village out there, which is absolutely strange. Like you feel like, am I in India?
When they cross the border.
But that's a very small thing.
But there's also another interesting reverse example in India, which I also really love about all these organic growth of urban settlements, which are these religious sites that grow for a migration season within the river. They call them ephemeral urbanism, and they build a city basically with toilets, with functions, and it accommodates a million of people for a religious festivity. And then
I can imagine that's what happens at Mecca also. Like they must be building temporary things.
That's what happens in music festivals too.
That's what happens during the World Cup.
In the Burning Man in the desert.
Yeah, the Burning Man is a good example. It's a good example.
Anyway, so to end this on a slightly controversial note.
On a positive, optimistic note.
Well, I see it as an optimistic note, but my understanding is that, you tell me if I'm wrong, but within the field, probably it's not that sentiment that is general towards the refugee camps and the fact that it actually might have more virtues than vices. And what's your position about that?
The thing is that everyone is now supporting this discussion of a socio-spatial refugee camps. So discussing camps as a space that is lasting is rather okay. The taboo part is to see that it's rather functioning. And there's a discussion within the literature of either perceiving camps as a space that is growing and has potential of recovering whatever, and the other extreme cases of seeing it, you probably read it in this paper, as a site where you're kind of deprived of everything, a site of suffering. They're called like bird lives or sites of exceptions. And I rather agree with that definition, however, in a positive way. So I think camps are exceptional, and I think it's because of their exceptionality they work better. So it is because in the camp we have only site-specific rules that refugees can work. For example, in Zaatari, I have 60% of the working age earning some sort of income. That's huge when you talk about amounts of refugees who get... the process of getting a job for refugees in urban settlements is more difficult because you have a host community to consider. You have the urban poor, all those unemployed in a country like Jordan, and then it becomes so hard to decide, I'm going to help Syrian refugees work in Jordan when my own urban poor are unemployed. In the camp, you have the exception of the fact that it's only them. It has an exceptionality.
The geographical separation minimizes the sense of inequality.
No, but do you imagine what you're saying? Can you picture like refugees all over the world, whenever something happens, having these organic settlements in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's
like, this is what I suddenly came to my mind.
And
is that a solution?
Yeah, but that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't think we can consider them as a spatial solution because they don't all exhibit the same story that Zaatari does.
Exactly. It's very context-based also.
It
also depends on the cultural homogeneity or what the line between cultures is. Because I can imagine it to be very, very isolated if there is a language barrier.
But for example, this Dadaab camp is made of different ethnic groups, and they manage not only to kind of grow, they manage to marry off each other and to kind of
but their own. Kind of going along his point is, can you imagine how people would see, how Germans, for instance, would react or feel about a Zaatari growing in the middle of Saxony or something like that?
But I think it becomes completely...
but what my point is, don't you think it would be more controversial for the population?
But it's, again, because... when you bring refugees here in Germany and contain them in a space, then it's by definition not the organic growth that Zaatari exhibited.
Yeah,
so
that's for sure.
It's definitely...
that's an approach to think about. That is something I've also not thought about. Like, we don't let them grow, but we want them to integrate as well. Maybe we don't, if we allow some sort of an organic development...
It's a trade-off, but it's a negotiation.
But you know, another issue with that will be you need to have the entire demographic, like all kind of age groups and all both the sexes coming in the same amount for them to have some sort of an organic
I think
existence.
What you need is to have a similar narrative that just happened to happen and grow. And now I think in the case of Zaatari, we're facing different questions than questions of how do we take these refugees and put them in cities. We can maybe discuss how do we consider Zaatari as an entity or a city that it has its own logic that is helping us, that is functioning, and work with that. But I don't think the process is let's take it as a prototype solution for refugee or displacement problem. So
I think case study based implementations always end up messing things up.
I think there might be some principles that could be with some level of stretching generalizable to some degree, but I don't know what those would be, and that's an entire
I don't know, So for instance, in Prague, it's a small community of Vietnamese living there, right? But there is the Little Vietnam there. And so this friend of mine who took me there and he said, we are going to Little Vietnam. You won't believe it's in Prague. And we go there and it really felt like I am in the southeast. Like in that small zone, they have completely transitioned into something completely different. And I think there's there is a rapid economic transfer happening between Prague and this space, but there is a definite contrasting barrier out there, which is super strange to observe.
Okay. So, just to end, it seems to me that the case study of Zaatari, with all these problems, and obviously that's optimally you would prefer to live in a world without refugee camps or without the need to have to build refugee camps, because obviously that stems from conflict. But it sounds. I wouldn't dare to say rather positive, but it's not a story precisely of success or anything like that, but it's not as negative as one might initially think.
Yeah, and I think it's just you have two scenarios. You have a scenario where you decide, obviously I'm against camps because they violate human rights. Even the UNHCR says these words, and because officially you have to be correct when you say this. Or you can have another perspective and say that they actually do exist and they're inevitable at times, and see why do they function better at some times. So that's the only proposition that I'm bringing. It's obviously ideal to live in a world without camps, but it's rather unavoidable.
Yeah, we don't live in that world yet.
I guess migration is inevitable, and with such close borders, conflicts are inevitable. But migration,
that is inevitable with capital I.
And migration is inevitable anyways. If there is some economic productivity in one part of the world, everyone is going to migrate there.
Okay, good. I think we can wrap it up now.
Yeah, I would assume so.
Good conversation about a topic that it's rather novel for both of us, I guess.
Yes, it was an interesting,
less familiar
thing to dive into.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so then let's say goodbye to the audience. Then.
It's a pleasure to have Sara, I guess. And with that,
see you next time.
Yeah.
If you like what we do, please help us continue doing it simply by subscribing to our YouTube channel, following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, visiting our website tillthebottom.com, or spreading the voice. All the links are provided in the description. Thank you for listening, and until the next time.